Men vanished in that country and down the river. They say it's damned good country to keep clear of. Advice given to explorer Raymond Patterson.
I fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. Welcome to Lurk, bringing you creepy, strange, and bone-chilling stories, with your host, Jamie Jackson.
Hey lurkers, welcome to this week's episode. This week's topic came as a topic suggestion from a lurker named Kara. We're talking about the Nahanni Valley, and there is a lot to unpack here. First, for research on this topic, I read the book Legends of the Nahanni Valley by Hammerson Peters. You can find a link to that in the show notes. The book had a lot of detailed information in it, so if you like stuff about prospectors and exploration, I definitely suggest that you check it out. The Nahanni Valley is in the Nahanni National Park Reserve in the Decho region of the Northwest Territories, Canada. The park covers 11,602 square miles and lies above the 60th parallel in the Arctic, in line with the rest of Canada's wild territories. It sits about 500 kilometers or 311 miles west of Yellowknife. The Nahanni Valley is incredibly hard to reach even today. You need to go either by water, air, or take a long overland journey from the abandoned town of Tungsten. The park protects a portion of the Mackenzie Mountains natural region. It's a blend of towering icy cold mountains and lush green river bottoms. There are 250 hot springs creating mists of sulfuric air, giving the valley an otherworldly appearance. The valley experiences extreme winter cold, around negative 50 degrees, and has a short, warm, and humid summer. The centerpiece of the park is the South Nahanni River, or the Dene. Four noteworthy canyons, called First, Second, Third, and Fourth Canyon, respectively, line the Whitewater River. Each canyon has walls reaching some 1,000 meters, or 3,300 feet in height. The fourth canyon starts at Virginia Falls. Located in the Funeral Range, Canyon 3 has long sloping walls instead of steep walls, and its end is marked by Big Bend, where the river makes a 45-degree turn. The beginning of the second canyon runs through the Headless Range and is 9.3 miles long. This is often an area where people see Dall sheep on the cliffs. The first canyon is located beyond an area known as Dead Men Valley and ends at Krause Hot Springs. It boasts the highest and the most vertical canyon walls. The word Nahanni comes from the local Dene name for the area, Naha Dehe, which means River of the Land of the Naha People. The park became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1978 and was one of the earliest locations to be given that designation. It was listed as a World Heritage Site because of the area's picturesque wilderness, its various waterways and giant falls, and its 1,000-meter deep limestone canyons, among other features. There are over 250 caverns within the valley, and most of those remain unexplored. In one cavern, the skeletons of 100 or more Dall sheep were found. They were thought to have gotten lost in there and died. It boasts a wealth of flora and fauna with many diverse animal species, many of which are predators, like grizzlies, timber wolves, and wolverines. The Nahanni Valley is one of the last truly unexplored and untouched places in the world. There are no human settlements there, and the access to the park is regulated through permits issued by Parks Canada. Only about 800 to 1,000 people visit the park each year. It does have 10,000 years of indigenous habitation. Historically, the Nahanni Valley has been home to the Dene tribe for many centuries. They never actually lived along the Nahanni River, though. The Dene oral history speaks of another tribe that lived there along the river called the Naha. The Naha people were warlike and lived in the high mountains, then descended into the lowlands to raid and kill. They were greatly feared by the Dene and said to be cannibalistic. Nahanni means the river of the land of the Naha people. Suddenly, though, the Naha disappeared all at one time. One minute they were there, and the next, gone. No trace of them has been found. There is speculation that they could have succumbed to disease, died out, stayed in the valley hiding in plain sight, or simply migrated. Some studies suggest a connection between the Navajo language and the language of the Naha, but we really just don't know what became of them. It's similar to the Anasazi people of the Four Corners region of the United States. If my anthropology professor Mel Lorenz is listening, yes, I remember everything that you taught me. Anyway, one of the legends of the Nahanni Valley is that it holds a mysterious tropical oasis somewhere. It's said that the tropical area is snow-free year-round, and the soil is black and fertile. The animals that live there are so well fed they're almost square-shaped with fat. Bones of mammoths and amphicyonidae, or bear dogs, were found in the valley. Many people believe that prehistoric animals still live there. Trappers saw fresh tracks of prehistoric mammals and brought back huge ivory tusks with flesh and hair still visible. The elders of the Dene tribe were able to accurately draw pictures of mastodons as though they were drawing them from memory. There are also stories of a prehistoric creature called the bear dog still roaming the valley. Amphicyonids were similar to primitive dogs in body proportions, while having a much heavier build similar to that of a bear. They walked with the foot bones flat against the ground, like bears, so that the full foot is in contact with the ground, while in modern dogs the bones are off the ground and serve as an extension to the length of the leg, which means that modern dogs essentially walk on their toes. It might not be that far-fetched to think that some prehistoric animals could have survived in the valley. Because of the high-walled canyons and the numerous hot springs, the Nahanni Valley was not as affected by the Ice Age, so perhaps there are creatures there that didn't die off. Possible prehistoric animals come into play again a little later. Right now we're going to jump to the next crazy story about the Nahanni Valley, and it's the story of how the area got its other name, the Headless Valley. Deadman Valley and Headless Valley are two of the other names of the area because, well, there were dead men found there and they were headless. Back in 1905, two brothers, Frank and Willie McLeod, went prospecting for gold. It was the brothers' second expedition into the Nahanni Valley, but this time they didn't return home. So in 1908, their other brother went out to find them. The search party came upon the burned-out camp of the McLeod brothers and their partner, Weir. They found the bodies of Frank and Willie McLeod. The bodies were lying on beds of spruce boughs. One body was tucked under its blanket, and the other was splayed out, reaching for a gun sitting nearby. Both skeletons were missing their heads. Their partner Weir was missing. Written on a dog sled runner left on a nearby tree was a message that read, "We have found a fine prospect." There was speculation that they had run out of supplies, but the men were considered excellent woodsmen and were veteran explorers of the area. After the bodies were found, the search party named the valley Dead Men Valley. The creek where their bodies were located they called Headless Creek. The Nahanni River became known as the River of the Headless Men. In 1970, another corpse was discovered. Swiss prospector Martin Jorgensen's body was found decapitated next to the remains of his cabin. The cabin had been burned to the ground. There was mention that he allegedly struck gold prior to being killed. Another body was discovered in 1927. Yukon Fisher was an outlaw and prospector who was wanted by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for several years prior to his death. Yukon's skeleton was found on the banks of Bennett Creek, very close to where the bodies of the McLeod brothers' bodies were found. His death was never fully explained, and he was known to possess a solid number of gold nuggets that he used to purchase goods when on the frontier. In 1931, the body of Phil Powers was found. They found his charred remains in the ashes of what used to be his cabin. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police said a faulty stovepipe was to blame, even though that claim was repeatedly debunked by multiple sources. It was more likely he was murdered and his cabin set on fire to hide the fact. There were a few that disappeared and were never found. In 1928, prospector Angus Hall ventured out ahead of his group and vanished. Joe Mulholland and Bill Epler, both prospectors, disappeared in 1936. People searched for them for many years, but they were never found. The only thing found was their cabin, which had been burned to the ground. In 1926, a woman named Annie Lafferty went missing while out on a hunting party. She got lost in the wilderness and disappeared. Months later, an Indian named Big Charlie claimed to have seen the woman climbing a hill, totally naked, seemingly having lost her mind. Another death happened in 1945 when a miner from Ontario was found dead, still in a sleeping bag. His head was never found either. There was also an unidentified headless man found next to a burned tent in 1945. Up to 44 people have died there since 1908. In 1962, there were 2 unexplained airplane crashes in the Nahanni Valley. The first involved pilot Angus Mackenzie. Angus survived the crash uninjured and was in good health. He had access to food and water, and he kept a journal for 42 days describing each day in detail. He was doing well while he waited for rescue. When searchers finally located the wreckage, they found Angus's journal. The journal entries ended abruptly on day 43. No trace of Angus was ever found. The second crash involved several people. Rescuers found 1 man dead at the crash site, prospector, but the pilot and other passengers had vanished. There was no sign of them at all. The Dene people always avoided the valley, not just because of the cannibalistic Naha people, but they also claimed that the valley was haunted by an unspeakable evil. They say there is a weather spirit that haunts the valley and makes itself known with its otherworldly shrieks on cold nights. They believed there were spirits there that could make men vanish. Speaking of the Naha, there's another legend associated with them. A woman referred to as the White Queen. The Naha were reclusive and extremely hostile to strangers. All tribes in the area were afraid of them. During an expedition in 1837, Robert Campbell and his companions came across some Naha people who actually treated them fairly. Campbell learned of a gathering of natives and decided to go, but while there he was taken advantage of by one of the leaders and had his rifle and provisions stolen. The men barely managed to make it out of the gathering. Once they left, they came across the Naha again, and while Campbell told his story of his encounter at the gathering, a beautiful fair-skinned woman came over. Upon hearing that his items were stolen, she marched down to the gathering and returned with the stolen items, telling Campbell and his men they needed to go in order to save their lives. This woman was the chiefess and commanded respect from all the native tribes in the Nahanni Valley. She became known as the White Queen. Nothing else is known of her, and some question if she actually exists at all. I imagine that between the Naha people and the headless bodies turning up all over the valley, there's enough to call the area strange. But we're not done yet. We need to talk about all the strange beings and creatures that have been encountered in the valley. One of those creatures is a giant. Well, actually, it's a whole race of giants that inhabit the Nahanni who are said to cook their meals in the Rabbit Kettle hot springs. I don't know if that last part is based on any kind of truth, but there are said to be giants there. These creatures are called the Nahanni, and are large, hairy men who live in the caves by day and hunt at night. One English adventurer said they were terrible wild men with red eyes and of enormous height, completely covered in long hair. The Nahanni left 3-foot-long human-like footprints and were able to tear birch trees from the ground with their bare hands, roots and all. These creatures were very similar to Sasquatch, though this creature was greatly feared. Entire encampments were abandoned and the inhabitants took shelter on an island to stay safe from the Nahanni. Their faces were said to be gaunt and their skin caked with filth. Some have made comparisons to the Wendigo. In the summer of 1965, the American Expeditionary Society, an academic club made up of 30 American university students wanting to resurrect the dying art of old-fashioned discovery expeditions, headed to the Nahanni Valley. In a letter to Ivan Sanderson, one wrote, "We started back down the river. Then suddenly my pal stopped and pointed at the soft wet ground in a little clearing. He was a bit rattled, and so was I. For there, most clearly marked in the mud, were 3 footprints of what appeared to be a barefoot man who would have had to take a shoe with an internal measurement of at least 16 inches. Another human-like creature living in the Nahanni Valley is the Nukluk. The Nukluk are short, bearded humanoids, half naked and carrying huge clubs. All I can picture in my head is Captain Caveman. Captain Caveman! Nukluk, or men of the bush, were sighted by the Dene trappers. They were said to be Bigfoot-esque, with a long, dark beard and no clothes. Described as less ape and more human, and about 5 feet tall. They make me think a little bit of dwarves or gnomes, maybe a little taller. In 1964, a wild man was sighted and said to be rather short in stature and quite strong, with a beard and wearing simple clothing. The first sighting was April of 1964, near Fort Liard. People came upon a man-shaped creature who was rather strong and sported a long beard. He wasn't wearing any type of clothing and carried no weapons. It appeared to be rather shy, and as the group got near it, it uttered a low growl and fled. The second sighting was May of the same year on the Nahanni Butte. At dusk, a Dene woman was made aware of a presence outside her cabin. When she looked out her door, she saw nothing, but a little later she looked up at the window, and there she saw a face. She got up and went outside to see who or what it was, but it was gone. A 14-year-old boy also had a run-in with a Nukluk. The stories from the 14-year-old. Now, wrote Graves, we go to my favorite tale. This was told to me by a boy of about 14, whom I knew only as Jerry. He was recommended to me for my purpose by the school teacher there. This little boy saw a creature identical to the previously mentioned one, except for a few exterior differences. This sighting is said to have occurred last fall, right outside of Fort Simpson. One evening, at about 9 p.m., the little fellow's dog began to bark. This event is not unusual, for his home is located right on the edge of the city dump, and a dog can pick up the scent of many different night scavengers during the passing of one night, especially in that country. On this night, however, the boy and his father went out to the dog to find out what was the matter. When they got out to the dog, it was quiet and standing most still. At first they detected nothing of unusual interest, but when the father turned on the flashlight for a little extra investigative work, they heard a slight noise. As they turned the light in the direction of the sound, they were surprised to see a rather small, dark creature answering to the general description of an ABSN, which would be abominable snowman. This creature is said to have remained where he stood for several minutes. At about that time, the dog again began to bark. With that, the creature departed at speed. The creature is said to have not immediately entered the bush, but instead crossed the boy's property and then across the road in front of the house. He was seen by several bystanders who gave slight chase, but upon their entrance into the picture, the creature quickly headed for the bush. He was not pursued. He went on to state that this wild man wore a piece of moose skin about its waist and was carrying a stone club. The creature had 4 fingers and thumb and was 5 feet tall. It wore rubber boots and its head was slightly pointed in the back and covered in short black hair. The tracks it left had claw marks. There's another small humanoid creature roaming the valley. Standing only 4 feet tall at most, these creatures have threatening features and tangled hair, large eyes, and broad cheeks. They're referred to as the dwarves of the Mackenzie Mountains. The local Dene said it was a race of magical dwarves that have fine living places in the heart of the mountain. They are exceptionally strong and wise and come out to capture Dene women to keep as their wives. Sometimes they will make the girl's father a medicine man in exchange for his daughter. They call them the Clunitene, or little men, who live on mice that they catch with small bows and arrows in the tall grass. They have a big reputation for making fun and have powerful shamanic abilities. They can bring up the wind and cold to paralyze their enemies. They get delight in helping humans. In 1911, there was a party of scientists that conducted an Arctic expedition. They found tiny footprints in the snow and followed them to an underground burrow. A little man came out that was about 3.5 feet tall and very thin, weighing only around 35 to 40 pounds. He had enormous ears, a triangle-shaped head coming to a peak with a small tuft of hair on top. Slowly, 27 people emerged from the burrow, all clad in very fine skins. Here's an eyewitness account of a gentleman named Roach and his girlfriend. They stayed in her parents' cabin, which was vacant at the time. This cottage, situated about 80 yards away from the grandmother's cabin, constituted the only other residence in that remote corner of the Arctic at the time. One day, while his girlfriend went out for tea at his grandmother's cabin, Roach went out to inspect her parents' fish net. "I got 3 fish in the net," Roach told the author, "filleted them and hung them to dry." That accomplished, he and his girlfriend, who had returned from her grandmother's cabin, both decided to take a nap in her parents' cabin. Just as they were drifting off to sleep, the couple heard an unexpected sound. "We both woke up to footsteps on the deck," said Roach. They heard the creaking of the cabin's outer door. Several seconds later, the inside door swung open. Roach, who was lying on the upper level of the bunk bed, glanced over at the open door, expecting to see his girlfriend's grandmother, as she was the only other person in the area at the time. There was no one there. Roach craned his neck to get a better view. "And there," said Roach, "was the smallest human I've ever seen, wearing a ragged old orange-colored coat and caribou skin pants." Suddenly both doors shut in unison, as if they were one. My girlfriend screamed. "Someone tried to get in." I jumped up to see who it was, looked out every window and didn't see anyone. I walked out the door and didn't see anyone. I thought to myself, Grandma can't move that fast. Her cabin is 80 yards away. Later, Roach and his girlfriend met up with her parents and told them of their experience. They told us a little person visited us, an Inuk, they called them. They were supposed to be folk stories for children, and one walked into our cabin. Remember the talk of all the little people of Native American legend from the East Coast, like the Nunahai? Now another region has another short-statured race. Humanoid creatures aren't the only ones roaming the valley. There is also a creature called the Wahila. A Wahila is a huge wolf-like creature that stands 4 feet at its shoulder. Some believe it is the embodiment of an evil spirit and kills people by removing heads. Many think the Wahila is an animal surviving from prehistoric times, like the bear dog or dire wolf that died more than 10,000 years ago. One account read, "It was an enormous white thing that I first thought must be a polar bear, just sort of wandered out of the trees. It wasn't a bear. It looked more like a gigantic dog. It stood straight up on rather long legs, more like a dog or wolf. This thing was 20 times the size of any wolf I had ever heard of. The man shot at it and hit it with both barrels of ball shot, but the thing didn't flinch. It turned away and walked back into the forest. He fired again and hit it in the rear, but it just kept walking. It stood 3 feet 6 inches at the shoulder, had a very wide head and very long shaggy white fur. And if you've listened to episode 9 and 10 about the Skinwalker Ranch, you might be thinking this description, down to the indifference to being shot, sounds a lot like the wolf creature that have been seen roaming the ranch. Go listen to those episodes if you haven't. These beasts are much larger than any wolf, and they're loners. They avoid real wolves and have smaller ears and much wider heads than typical wolves, and rather short legs with splayed feet. The tail is very thick and more like an otter tail. The Wahila is more of a scavenger than a predator. The Dene people are terrified of them because they are impossible to kill. The body is around 11 feet long with a 4-foot tail, and the body slopes away like a bear. And that sounds like the prehistoric bear dogs I mentioned in the beginning of the episode. The only natural enemy of the Wahila is said to be the Nahanni lion. Not much was mentioned of this lion, other than it was very hairy and had a large woolly mane and resembled the prehistoric North American cave lion. And that is going to do it for this episode. If you're interested in more detailed information about the expeditions and the people of the Nahanni Valley, I highly recommend reading Legends of the Nahanni Valley by Hammerson Peters. You can find a link in the show notes as I mentioned. As always, you can find Lurk wherever you get your podcasts and on our website at lurkpodcast.com. Also on the website, you'll find our new blog and a place to sign up for our monthly newsletter. If you like what you hear, tell every person that you know, and maybe consider giving us a 5-star review. And until next time, keep lurking.